Ch. 38 Dragon Gods Go to War. Following Justinian's tryst with Rimnosh and Laurelina, he did do what he said he would and visit the surface. When he was exposed to the sunlight, he could feel his armor begin to adapt and become more receptive to solar radiation. He then began to feel his cells start storing solar radiation, enhancing his physical abilities. Eventually, that would show its worth just like the burning Martian genetics he had assimilated. He had all the benefits stacked in his favor, and if he didn't use them, he would just be setting himself up for failure. Once he focused, he did visit his predicants who were happy to see him. Predaking, Grimlock, Grindel, Devastator, and Ravage as his contracted familiars were bonded to his soul. His soul was one of his biggest advantages, as thanks to his perpetual nature and the fact he had two dragon gods connected to it, the pressure forced his soul to continue to adapt. He would not claim to have the most powerful soul in the galaxy, but he was probably not far off. Once he visited his pets, he promised them plenty of carnage in the coming solar system wars, which seemed to placate them for the time being. He also visited all of the growing farms in person, as he was just curious to see them in action. Any crop that was grown from Terra on Mars mutated thanks to the magic coursing through the planet. Wheat became gigantic, the fruit became far more sweet, and even contained mana. On one farm, a white Martian farmer revealed he was growing psychic beans. The beans had a weak effect in that they helped grow the psychic power of those who ate them. There were plenty of crops and farms where even the livestock were forced to adapt. Though aside from farms, several more fortresses were growing as now. He even teleported directly to Olympus Mons, where he had arrived when he first arrived on Mars. Rimnosh and Laurelina, who were with him, looked up to the erupting volcano as, thanks to his actions, geological activity was back. The city that had been under it left when it started bubbling magma. When Justinian saw that, he began to hum as he had planned to turn this into a giant manufactorum like on Mars of 40K. Guess I will have to hold off on that till the magma stops. Laurelina turned to him with a smile. Why not use your power to just stop it? Or get the Shapers to do it? Justinian shook his head as the volcano kept spewing magma and other stuff into the surroundings. Sometimes a good volcanic erupting is a good thing. The mana being released will saturate this area. Regardless, I think I am done here. As he started walking back, followed by the two burning Martians, he had a bit more pep in his step. Both smiling, they followed after him as he opened a portal back to his throne room. When he took his place on his throne, he relaxed as they both sat down on the armrests of his throne. This is the life. With a smile on his face, he closed his eyes as he allowed himself to sleep. A rare thing for him, with how he didn't get tired. However, turning off his mind for even a few hours could be relaxing. Following Justinian acquiring the proper genetic material he desired, he set resources apart for the cloning of his massive clone army. Once the cloning facility was set up and clones were starting to get produced, he set up many safeties to prevent his clones from betraying him. The interesting thing was, since the 3 Kryptonian clones had souls, it stood to reason the new clones he was making did have souls as well. When he saw that, he set up so the cloning facility would place a magical imprint of his magic on each clone's soul. The imprint instilled loyalty and courage and drove away fear and other negative emotions. Much like his Marines, he also placed more in their genetics, which he had made to double down on the lack of betrayal. He did not want a Horus heresy or whatever would happen in DC. It was bad enough in 40K, he didn't need it in this reality as well. Once the facilities were up and cloning began, he also placed some focus on the Prometheum armor of Slade. After discovering how the material worked, he added it to the flak and Carapace armor the clones would wear. He decided to name them after the 54 Scion Jackals, who were Eldar hunting regiment of Tempestus Science. Their armor also contained trace amounts of adamantium to increase its durability. Once the first clones were produced, he tested them against each other, finding that they didn't hesitate to follow his orders or the orders of those that were to command them. In battle, thanks to the genetic template, he used the Lazarus Pit genetics of Raz merged with Slade's super soldier modified ones to increase aggression and regeneration. He also added in the combat memories of Slade and Roz into their genetics, meaning each one would be a master combatant. Adding the limited Kryptonian DNA added to their genes, they could also absorb solar radiation to increase their regeneration and physical abilities. While Slade could lift around 5 tons at his best, these new clones could lift to 50 straight out of the cloning facilities. When they were tested, they could run more than 150 miles per hour out of the pods, which would increase thanks to their ability to absorb solar radiation to enhance their attributes slightly. It was worse than Superboy since he used only around 5% Kryptonian compared to Superboy's 50%. They couldn't fly or use laser vision or a tactile aura, but they made it up for it with numbers. Once his clones were regarded as a success, he ordered mass production to begin. For a start, he ordered around 50 million clones for a start, which would take time to deliver. The ones that were produced were added to the military of the Imperium. They were spread out to all the cities, kingdoms, and empires that now bent the knee to the Imperium. After their mandatory basic training, just to make sure nothing was wrong with their genetics or minds. While they were loyal to the Imperium and Justinian, they were still sentient. As such, he ordered these clones to be treated just as if they were people. There would be no discrimination for A.I, clones, or aliens if they were in the Imperium. Only outsiders or enemies, which was not hard because these clones were all warriors. White Martians respected the warriors, and while the League began to prepare for an eventual Justinian invasion of Terra. However, their preparations were not preparing for Justinian to begin diplomatic missions. He sent his diplomats to meet with the rulers of Russia, China, North Korea, Malaysia, India, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Bialya, Markovia, and Santa Prisca. All of them had been killed, including Queen Bee, the ruler of Bialya. He never liked her, so he ordered her murdered and replaced by one of his trained infiltrators. Since the League could not stop Justinian from meeting with these countries, they never expected all of them to agree to not just begin diplomatic relations, but to allow Justinian to place his troops in their countries. When that was revealed in these countries, unrest began in the population, but it was crushed with an iron heel by the Martian infiltrators. Thanks to their psychic abilities, these infiltrators could force their will to pass laws that favored Justinian. This made it illegal to protest against diplomacy with the Imperium of Mars, as it was called for the moment. Not just that, several laws were passed that made it illegal for the Justice League to operate in their lands. If the League entered anyway, it would be seen as an act of war. Speaking of war, Justinian began to place more and more of his clone army of Cyan Jackals in these countries. He built massive military bases in each of these countries with technology and magic that made these fortunes go up in a short amount of time. The Imperium then built massive teleport gates in these bases from which troops, tanks, artillery, jets, and bioships could be brought across planets. Even the insectoids, as he took to calling the giant insects that evolved on Mars. The League, seeing what Justinian was doing through the legal means as an extension of the American government and the UN Charter, were limited in what they could do. They couldn't go over to these countries and ask to be allowed into these bases. Infiltrating them was also a no-go, as each one had more ways to make sure no one got in that was not supposed to go in. Even worse was when Space Marines and Tempesticians started crossing over in massive numbers. These were Martians who were even more of a threat than the Cyan Jackals, who were rank-and-file soldiers. The infiltrators then began to pass more laws and bills to encourage trade and defense pacts with the Imperium. This allowed Justinian's troops to begin to place military power through these countries. Even Laurelina decided to come over, which meant one of Justinian's honor guard, an enhanced burning Martian with magic, psychic, and Kryptonian genes, was over. A Justice League-level threat was here, and she brought with her Inquisitors. These Martians were elites trained to root out any kind of traitorous thoughts. Through magic, they would always find their targets, allowing them to put down rebellions before they started. Even the militaries of these countries were taken over by replacing their leadership. More orders were passed that began to allow for joint exercises between the forces of Justinian. However, the clones only saw the humans as weak and couldn't even pass their warm-ups. The Marines, Scions, and Shapers all now understood that humanity was only protected from them by the League. It was embarrassing how their previous invasion was pushed back by these people. While changes were happening on Earth, Justinian, Drake, and Albion had amped up their training. By creating new dimensions, the three of them could fight battles against each other or Justinian's honor guard. Sometimes, Drake fought against Albion and Justinian, or vice versa, or Albion and Drake took on Justinian alone. It was good training as the three of them were soul brothers, and the more they worked together, the stronger they became. Currently, it was one such battle as Justinian flew toward Drake as a giant. He had enhanced his size, making him 100 meters tall, around the same size as Drake's dragon god form. Drake, with a grin, charged at Justinian. Boost X10. Instantly his power was multiplied to 1,048,576 times itself, which caused Drake to begin to glow like a supernova of red and gold. As Drake and Albion flew next to each other, Drake smirked. Transfer. Instantly, all the power Drake gathered surged into Albion, causing Justinian to smile. He gripped his titanic guardian spear in his hand as he did something similar. Boost X10. When his power was increased to 1,048,576 like Drake, it felt like he had liquid gold flowing through his veins in an intoxicating way. He flew forward on mechanized wings as Albion opened his mouth. A massive burst of purple-red fire surged at Justinian. When it reached him, Justinian didn't block as it hit his body. His aura-mite halo shimmered as it blocked, but more importantly, he had fused Albion's reflector into it. When Albion's attack was absorbed, Justinian channeled all that power and more into his Stormbolter. He raised his left hand and released 2 bolter rounds full of enough power to shred a star cluster. However, Drake and Albion linked their minds together as they opened a massive dragon gate, absorbing the bolter. Another opened above Justinian's head, but he repeated the same as his friends, teleporting his attack directly above them. Explosion. When the blast hit in full force, it was so powerful that Sigismund braced his sword to not be sent flying. Rimnosh turned to him as that was a big attack. Are they fine? Fine and dandy. From the center of the blast, Drake flapped his wings, dispersing the energy. When it was revealed that aside from minor cuts and bruises, he was fine. The same applied to Albion, who was healing at a visible rate. Justinian shrunk himself down as his dragon godbrothers returned to their human forms. Rimnosh was curious about something. How are you fine? Drake dusted himself off as Albion gave a fist bump to Justinian. Simple, since Justinian is a perpetual, and we're his soul brothers, we kind of became perpetuals too. Besides, we are very resistant to each other and our energies. Albion nodded. What he said, we can't harm each other all that well, and we don't need to. Now, Justinian, how long have we been in this time dilation of Mars? 5 years and 11 months. Now that I think about it, the time dilation field goes down tomorrow, right? Drake nodded. And then we have to meet with the Saturnians in the asteroid belt. Justinian smiled as he thought of his armada. Aside from his Gloriana-class battleship, they had managed to build another 2. The Conqueror and the Vengeful Spirit, along with several other marks. That would be quite the shocker to the Saturnians, and even more so when Justinian called Clarion to start his ritual. First thing first, we meet with the Saturnians, and then we begin preparing for the takeover of Earth. The gods can't manifest on Earth as much as they could. Drake and Albion nodded as they returned to the boosted gear and divine dividing. Trust me, we will get it done. We will get you the mother box. Having access to the boom tubes of the new gods would be useful in our conquests. Wouldn't it be interesting to go to the Injustice universe? A bit, but I'd rather not go and stir the bee's nest yet. Instead, focus on what we got now. That is smarter than Drake's limited brain cells can process. Aha, very funny. Quite both of you. Aye, sir. Yes, Dad. He teleported himself and his honor guard back to the secret dimension where he kept his fleet. 3 Gloriana class, several escort vessels, battle cruisers, and battle barges. Though none of them measured to his personal Fagel ship, the Invincible Reason. While it was 30 miles long, the other two were only around 25 miles long. It was a grand fleet regardless that would only grow as the Imperium did. Justinian connected to the psychic net. Prepare my fleet. At his order, his ships would be manned and prepared for tomorrow when he would meet with the Saturnians. After that, in the following weeks, he would start preparing for his takeover of Earth. As Justinian decreed. Ch. 39, the intergalactic meeting. The Saturnians, following their meeting with Justinian, had kept their word and prepared to meet him in 6 weeks according to Earth time. Their king, after seeing the kind of power that Justinian could use, felt the need to bring about peace or an assurance that they would not be destroyed by Justinian's great power. There was one thing the Saturnians wrongfully assumed. They had fully expected for Justinian and the Martians to lack proper space vessels other than a few bioships. They expected to use that as a means to get some advantages from Justinian. However, they had no expectations for the uses of magic like what Justinian could use. While Dragon Deus, or DXD, was considered a weaker world, its magic was beyond useful and versatile. It became lethal when upgraded to the level that Justinian could use it to. It allowed Justinian to turn 6 weeks into 6 years, and he could have gone for 50 years or more if he so desired. He only went ahead with 6 years to allow him to prepare his forces for the invasion of Earth. Of course, to start it off, he was going to have Drake and Albion invade Themyscira for the mother box they kept. Once he acquired that, he would have Clarion cast his ritual to separate the adults and children to make taking over Earth easy. His army would have to be sparred from this, as the League would be in the adult dimension other than Billy Batson. Justinian would have to order the boy captured since he remembered what happened in the Young Justice TV show. Billy had been quite useful in interrupting the ritual, but in the animated series, the League became children. Isn't it kind of unfair that you have so many sources of media to call back to? Just ask yourself, what would Batman do? And you can just go to the Arkham video game series, Batman animated series, Justice League animated series, and Justice League of the Comics. Then again, Justinian didn't ask to be brought to this reality. That is true. When I asked to be a Custodes, I fully expected to get sent to 40K. I planned to use the power you two grant me to carve out my own Imperium anyway. That or find a way to revive the Emperor or kill Slaanesh. I do have to question why you keep making some of your Honor Guard female Primarchs. Why not? The Primarchs are cool and all, but the female versions of them are just hot. And they're the right size for me, because I don't like shrinking down. Rather than shrink, shouldn't I make my partners my size? What about Diana? Justinian didn't respond as he sat in his command throne. Already Soundwave was connecting his armor to the ship to initiate a soul link. We talked about this already, Drake. I'm not judging you, brother. I am just saying that I want you to be sure that all this power and this Custodes body hasn't snuffed out all your humanity. Justinian hummed as Soundwave spoke to him once he was linked to the invincible reason. My master, we are ready to begin. The Conqueror, Vengeful Spirit, and the other vessels of the fleet are ready. Justinian, through his linked senses with the invincible reason, could see the other 2 Gloriana-class battleships, which are going to be flying directly at the sides of his vessel. Around them, they had smaller escort ships, battle cruisers, battle barges, and strike cruisers. A total of 24 vessels, not including the 3 Gloriana-class battleships. Across the fleet, he had brought with him half a legion of Space Marines, which was nearly 250,000 Space Marines. There were also several hundreds of thousands of signed Jackal clones, as well on top of the technicians, engineers, and warshapers in case Justinian decided to just conquer Saturn. Remnosh and Laurelina stood at his sides as they waited for his order. Soundwave, initiate warp jump. At once, massive amounts of power began to flow into the warp drive in the center of Justinian's flagship. Such a vast amount of energy, but the piece of dark age of technology, tech, began to roar to life. In front of the fleet, a massive purple wound in reality began to open up. Geller fields. He didn't want to risk it, and had every ship to have a Geller field. Across the fleet, Geller fields and powerful void shields fired to life. Justinian squinted his eyes as the portal opened wide directly to the asteroid belt. This was a test to see if the warp drive worked, and so far it did. Soundwave, without needing an order, began to advance the fleet forward, starting with the 3 Gloriana-class battleships. Then the escort ships and the rest of the vessels one by one. When all of the ships were through and the warp portal closed behind them, Justinian looked out not at the warp, but more like a wormhole or portal that was transporting them. Soundwave, are you getting this? I am. We are safe. The trip was very short and only took around a minute before another warp portal opened up at the asteroid belt. The warp drive was meant for long trips across the galaxy, not trips within planet systems. Justinian used it anyway, because he had to test it before he tried to take a trip to the edge of the galaxy. One by one, his fleet made it out of the warp portal with no issues, not even a loss of fleet formation. Already waiting for them were the Saturnians, who had arrived in their own fleet because their king was going to be there. However, never in their wildest dreams would they have thought to see a ship over a mile long. Their ships were nowhere near as big, armored, or as wide as the Invincible Reason. Seeing that Titan emerge from a tear in space flanked by 2 other vessels of similar stature left their much larger fleet feeling like they were the ones at a disadvantage. Even more so when the other vessels emerged, a total of 24 vessels, with the smallest escort ship being 2.5 miles long, larger than even their king's flagship. Both fleets were separated by a distance of 1,000 miles, but that was tiny for Justinian's vessels. Even now, Soundwave was locking in with all his weapons at the much more numerous, if weaker, fleet. If they turn hostile, I will reduce them to memories. There is no need. Send a message that Emperor Justinian is here. Soundwave did as ordered and began to relay messages across the void to the other fleet. Eventually, they received a communication that Soundwave displayed in Justinian's command deck. On the other end was a Saturnian, a red Martian dressed in what seemed to be diamond armor. It shimmered as if it were stars, but the Saturnian ruler no longer felt so grand in his diamond armor as he looked at the giant that was Justinian. I am Scrimic Tlos IV, king of my people, the Saturnians. I am Justinian Arcadius Valoris Valdur, god emperor of the Imperium of Mars. Your people came to me before because of the power I have. From what I can see, you assumed that I would lack a fleet of my own, but that is not the case. I also will ask this: what is it you are after, Scrimic? The red-skinned Saturnian clenched his fist in his throne as he felt he had control in this meeting. He never had any control, as even without a fleet, Justinian alone could reduce his fleet to nothing. He took a moment to think, as at any moment, he could be sure Justinian's fleet could destroy his. That was not counting Justinian's burning Martians or his space marines, who could all fly in the void. As enhanced Martians, they could destroy fleets without their ships with relative ease. Justinian was not sure how powerful the Saturnians were, but he doubted they could compare to his space marines. For a few moments, the Saturnian king didn't know how to respond. If he said something to offend Justinian, what was stopping him from simply shrinking their planet and killing them all? He swallowed his pride, since he was dealing with a being with power beyond his comprehension. What do you want? Justinian smiled as he leaned back in his throne. Simple. Surrender to me and the Imperium. Eventually, every planet in this solar system is going to belong to me, and I need compliance. Now, if you decide to willingly join the Imperium, I can guarantee you some freedoms. You can reject to join, and I can have my fleets and my army come to make you comply. I do guarantee your people will not be driven to extinction, but you will save millions, if not billions, depending on how many of you there are. Scrimic grit his teeth as he gripped down on his throne. If he said no, he knew that Justinian would do what he said. He would force them to comply, but if they joined willingly, they could have some freedom. Suddenly, the silence was broken on the end of Scrimic. One of his bodyguards rushed forward. We will never surrender to you or anyone. We will fight to the last man, woman, or sea dash. Before he finished his speech, Justinian waved his hand, and through the distance of space, the Saturnian exploded. Every person in the command deck of the Saturnians turned their head to address the puddle of flesh and blood. Scrimic began to shiver as all Justinian needed to do was wave his hand, and when his own was dead. He still vividly remembered what happened to Mars itself. One moment, it is normal, and the second it is sized up. Around it, Phobos and Deimos were both sized up, meaning Mars had 2 large moons. As Justinian had planned, one of those was going to be turned into a shipyard, while the other into an orbital defense platform. It didn't take Skrimmick long to come up with an answer, causing him to lower his head. If he kept his pride, it would just bring his people slavery. If he accepted they could keep some freedom, I accept your offer. This time Justinian decided to not enforce things through soul-binding contracts. They were useful for Mars, which was his home base. As for the solar system, he would just have to crush rebellions when they happened, rather than enslave entire populations of worlds. I'm glad we could have this discussion, Skrimmick. I will send a diplomat in a few days to get things written on paper. You are now part of the Imperium, and all must begin paying the tithe, but we will go over that soon. That will be all. You may return. Skrimmick bowed his head and removed his crown. If Justinian didn't do it, the 50 giant guards behind him would. Yes, my lord. Laurelina took a feast to that. You will refer to him as Emperor or God Emperor. Please forgive me, my Emperor. Justinian hummed. You're forgiven. With that, the long-distance communication ended, but Justinian's fleet did not turn around. Instead, they turned their sights to Jupiter. My scans reveal that the life form that lives on the moons of Jupiter is not fully organic. They are metallic in composition. What shall you have me do? Nothing for now. Take us back to Mars. Before he could do that, Sigismund spoke up. My Emperor, may I suggest something? Justinian turned to address him. Of course, what is it? Allow me to bring them to compliance. I need no reinforcements. Just me alone is enough. Justinian liked the sound of that. Like the Viltrumites? One conqueror for world? Sigismund nodded. I do not know what a Viltrumite is, but it sounds like Kryptonian. If that is the case, I shall achieve this for you in your name. Go, do your thing. Sigismund nodded as he placed his helmet on his head before, in a flash FO fire, he teleported into the void. Justinian still ordered his fleet to turn around to return to the shipyard of Phobos, which was being constructed. Meanwhile, Sigismund wanted to show why he was one of Justinian's honor guard. The Jovians would either accept compliance, or they would be melted down into slag. 40 Jovian metal eaters. While Justinian's fleet returned to Phobos, Sigismund floated in front of Jupiter in the void of space. His helmet was in his right hand at the moment, exposing his cold face. However, that didn't last long, as his face was split into a bloody grin. He placed his dark helmet on before releasing his burning Martian form, causing the insides of his power armor to flood with purple flames. Since the armor was soul-bonded thanks to Justinian doing this for each of his honor-goers, the armor was strengthened under the fire. He reached for his waist and drew out the black sword, which began to crackle with a matter disruption field-infused psi-magic energy. There was also something else in the blade. Much like the Emperor, Justinian infused a shard of his power into it. Now, this sword was a lethal artifact even gods would covet. Once he had his sword in hand, he focused on the display inside his armor that scanned the planet and the many moons. Jupiter had 4 major moons that could be called moons, while the rest were irregular asteroids or similar space objects. The Jovians, creatures of living metal, dominated these moons. They gained power by eating other metals and gaining their properties. Justinian didn't know much more than that, as they were from the pre-Crisis series of comics. From the Golden Age of comics, which was something he had not read much on. The art style was unappealing for him, but he had at least known that much. As for the Jovians, they lived spread out much like ants across the many moons. They had no concept of a ruler. Instead, they just simply would eat the metals of the moons to gain strength. If they got lucky, each other, which made for a rather primitive, if savage, culture. With that in mind, Sigismund flew through the void toward Callisto, which was one of the more rocky compared to the other main moons. As a result, it housed the largest population of Jovians who had limited space-faring abilities. The Saturnians avoided the moons of Jupiter because the Jovians had tried to eat their ships for the metal. When he arrived at the moon, He released an aura of fear on the entire moon, causing it to shake violently. It pressed on the minds of the Jovians, who began to surface from the rocky underground. They rose in the millions, causing the surface to be covered in their metallic bodies. When they rose, at the front of them was one of the oldest of their kind. Among the Jovians, they called him Great One for his long life and how much rare metal he had eaten. When the Great One laid eyes on Sigismund, his instincts began to scream in hunger, a deep primordial hunger, as he looked at the black sword in Sigismund's hands. Even the armor itself was calling to every Jovian to eat. Sigismund could tell what was going through the minds of these metal creatures, and he was not pleased. "You dare covet what my emperor and master have bestowed on me? I shall give you this one chance. Kneel before him, Emperor Justinian Arcadius Valorous Valder, rightful emperor of this solar system and galaxy." The Great One, as his people called him, looked at the black sword of Sigismund once more before he made his choice. "Eat!" He rushed towards Sigismund like a mindless creature, followed by a swarm of his kind. Whoever ate even a tiny shard of that sword and armor would become the most powerful, and they would not let this chance go. Seeing this made Sigismund grit his teeth. He extended his magical strength through the void to reach Justinian. "My emperor, these Jovians are insects. They have no survival instincts in the face of a superior foe. They are led by their base desires." Justinian nodded while sitting on his command throne in the invincible reason. "Wipe them out to the last, at once." With the link cut, Sigismund bellowed a roar that shook Callisto before he flew into the mass of Jovians. As he did, billowing waves of purple magic flames burst in every direction. One reason Justinian had chosen burning Martians as his honor guard was for their broken abilities. Furnace, Martian Manhunter's alter ego, once beat the entire Justice League, including Wally West. He was not sure if his burning Martians were that fast, but Sigismund was not just the best swordsman among them. He was also relentless. Many times faster than light, Sigismund appeared in front of the Great One, who was still looking up to where Sigismund was. He didn't even notice when the item he so wished to devour sliced him from head to crotch. Sigismund began to move through the entire swarm, slicing through them like tofu. In less than a second, Sigismund was at the end of the swarm of Jovians. His face was blank, as if what he had just done was merely a light stroll. He placed his sword in its sheath, causing the millions of Jovians' minds to start to catch up to them. Starting with the Great One, they began to fall apart and cut apart into chunks. Sigismund, using his telekinesis, picked up the remains before he flew off toward Mars. Sigismund would not let these corpses go to waste, as their material could be good research for his emperor. As for Justinian, his fleet began to dock at Phobos, where a large fleet deck was being constructed. Much like the Mars of 40K, Justinian would turn Mars into the best forge world in the galaxy, only he would not destroy the entire environment to do it. He rose from his command throne as he could sense that Sigismund was doing good work. With his busted abilities as a burning Martian with Kryptonian DNA and all the magical and biomantic enhancements, they were the best elite guards. He has finished his work. As Justinian began to walk out to disembark, his honor guard began to follow behind him. Remnosh, who was walking at his side, turned to him. What was the deal with the Jovians again? Laurelina explained this to her. Think for a second, if those creatures were so mindless that they thought they could take on Sigismund, one of us, they were not worth bringing into the fold. What if we were taking them in a ship like the Invincible Reason, the Conqueror, or Vengeful Spirit, and they get peckish? What if they start trying to eat the ship? Remnosh rolled her eyes. I know that I'm asking, why are they so stupid? Helbrecht, who was the second best swordsman around them, turned to her. They are beasts controlled by their desires. Something Sigismund could see from them, so he destroyed them before they could be an issue. Right, my emperor? Justinian nodded. Correct. Of course, they are not extinct, as there are more on the other moons, but in much smaller numbers. I will have them rounded up to be experimental material. I want to see what would happen if we fed them magical metals and then melted them down. Perturabo began to chuckle, bringing attention to himself. Now that sounds fun. One after the other, the rest of Justinian's honor guard began to laugh as they got off the ship. Justinian didn't have to wait very long before Sigismund joined their group. With him, he had plenty of metal from these Jovians. He placed them in a pile at Phobos before he bowed. "I have brought back their corpses, my emperor. Excellent work. I see you have made good use of that sword. Keep living up to the name of Sigismund of the Black Templars." Rimnosh suddenly got curious as Justinian made it clear he named them all after people he knew in 40K. "So why haven't you renamed me? Who did you model me after? I know you made me and my brother look alike." She pointed to the back where her brother, one of the ones she didn't hate, who Justinian named Corvus Corax. "To answer your first question, I just like your name." In actuality, Corvus Corax, who he was named after, had no sisters. Only brothers. "Since you were siblings, I made you look alike." That answered some questions, but with that answered, they continued walking. As she stayed still, her brother elbowed her in a brotherly fashion. He was the youngest of her siblings and the one she could safely say she liked. As for the rest, they were given over to Laureline, who trained them to be inquisitors. Speaking of inquisitors, her agents on Earth were doing a mighty fine job finding people planning to commit heresy and betrayal. Regardless, Justinian sent all the material of the Jovians into his lab. He would test it there and find if there was any use in the species. As for himself, he teleported himself and his honor guard back to his throne room. The following few days became hectic, as Justinian now had a free claim to Jupiter and Saturn. As he had said, he sent a diplomat to meet with Scrimic, the king of the Saturnians. The diplomat in question was Robert Gilliman, followed by Dorn and Perturabo. The three burning Martians had a very skewed contract of compliance written by the king of the Saturnians. Scrimic would have to give up his claim of being royalty, and in exchange, he could be the planetary governor of Saturn. However, he would need to send one or more of his heirs to be held hostage on Mars. Onto the other agreements. The imperial tithe would begin, meaning that Scrimic would need to send a quota of materials from his civilization, including people. For his agreement, he would receive technology, and if he proved himself, magical enhancements to himself and those of his choosing. Of course, this would come with more agreements that would prevent betrayal, but Scrimic signed the magically binding agreement regardless. When it came to Scrimic heir, he had a pair of twins, a boy and a girl. Both were taken by Dorn, but Scrimic was promised that as long as he paid the tithe, he would be fine. As for Jupiter, since it was an uninhabited world at the moment, Justinian left it alone. He had some ideas on how he could colonize it since, unlike 40K, the 21st century lacked humans. He would need to bring more clones, but rather than mass-produce clones, he would need a diverse selection to make a proper breeding population to seed life onto lifeless planets. To do this, he ordered his agents on Earth to begin collecting blood samples from the humans on Earth. He needed a wide diversity from a big selection of different ethnicities. They were sent to the cloning facilities where they could begin creating new clones for colonization. They were lightly modified to live twice as long as regular humans and are much more hardy. Their reproduction abilities were enhanced a bit so they could have more kids in less time. Rather than 9 months, 5 months was enough to produce offspring. He had not seen what would happen if clones had children, so he wanted that tested before relying on clones for colonization. So far, his army of Slade clones was stable, but since they were all men, they were not having kids. That was going to be a very interesting subject to research, but he would leave that for someone else. In the meantime, he, Albion, and Draig continued their training as they were very interested in advancing to the next level. What that was, they didn't know, but Justinian suspected it would involve the god space. If possible, he would go to the fairy lands where magic reigned supreme. The only thing was that the Fae had different rules, like eating things and technology not working. Justinian was worried if his power armor would work, but it should since it was magic and technology. Unless the technology would turn off, leaving just the magic side of things. It could be dangerous, but a place of pure magic was perfect for someone like Justinian and his draconian friends. It was placed into the back of his mind as he had to focus on Earth. On Earth, something of interest was happening as Diana had gone to Justinian's embassy in D.C. Outside, The same two Space Marines VES and Stracker who he had saved from Clarion had been permitted to have a child together. Since white Martians have fast gestation, their child was already born and growing healthy on Mars. The two giant white Space Marines were standing in their full power armor with their giant magic spears. They stood still like statues, but they began to move when they saw Wonder Woman land in front of them. They grabbed their spears and pointed them at her. The lenses in their helmets began to glow bright red as they prepared to release their heat Vyson. This is the Imperial Embassy. Entrance is not allowed. Diana didn't seem to care what VES said. I need to see Justinian. Take me to him. Stracker gripped his spear tighter, angry at the disrespect. The Martians at this point, thanks to Laureline, viewed Justinian as a god. To hear her say his name so bluntly pissed them off. You will address him as emperor or not at all. Diana was going to keep speaking, but on Mars, Justinian, sitting on his crystal throne, nodded. Through the vast distance, he psychically linked to VES and Stracker. Let her through, she's a friend. VES and Stracker touched their heads as they felt their emperor's voice. They bowed to the air as they accepted his will. By your will, my emperor. VES and Stracker stopped their heat vision and they stood at attention. VES nodded. The emperor is allowing you to see him. Follow us. Thank you. Diana followed both Space Marines Martians inside the embassy to take her to the teleportation gate inside. This meant she was not going to be on Earth, which opened Themyscira for attack by Drake and Albion. While Diana was taken to meet with him, Drake and Albion created powerful avatars before teleporting to Earth. They would get Justinian the mother box one way or another, and this was the perfect way.